My son, Leo, slammed his fist on the mahogany dining room table, the same table his father had built with his own hands. The crystal vase in the center, a wedding gift from 30 years ago, rattled precariously. "We are not asking, Mother. We are telling you. You will sell this house. The market is peaking, and we need our inheritance now." My daughter, Sophie, stood behind him, her arms crossed, a carbon copy of his entitlement. "He's right, Mom. It's just sitting here, gathering dust. You don't need this much space. It's selfish." They stared at me, their faces hard and impatient, waiting for me to crumble as I always had. They saw a frail widow, a soft touch, a woman they could easily steamroll. They had no idea that their father, my late husband David, was about to speak to them from beyond the grave and strip them of everything they thought was theirs. They didn't realize that in my hands, hidden beneath a napkin on my lap, was the very instrument of their downfall. It wasn't a lawyer's letter or a revised will. It was something far more personal, far more damning. They thought their greed was a secret they shared only between themselves, a quiet poison they had nursed for years. But David had known. He had always known, and he had left me one final gift, a weapon disguised as a memory, to protect me when he no longer could. My children believed they were moments away from cashing in on their father's legacy. In reality, they were seconds away from being disowned by a ghost. You might be wondering how my own children, the two people I sacrificed everything for, could become so monstrous. To understand how we arrived at this cold, sterile confrontation, you have to understand the secret their father kept for over a decade. The answer was locked away in his old office, on a single cassette tape I found just last week. It all started 3 months after David's funeral. The sympathy cards had stopped coming. The casseroles in the freezer were gone, and the house had settled into a profound and heavy silence. My children, Leo and Sophie, had made it clear they had no interest in the practicalities of death. They didn't help sort through clothes or handle the paperwork. Their calls were brief, always circling back to the same topic: the will, the estate, the money. They spoke of their father's assets as if they were items on a shopping list they had been waiting to fulfill. Their lack of grief was a cold, hard stone in my chest. To them, David's passing wasn't a loss. It was an opportunity. I had been avoiding his office. It was his sanctuary, the one room in the house that was entirely his. It smelled of old books, wood polish, and his faint, familiar scent. Finally, one Tuesday morning, I forced myself to open the door. The room was just as he'd left it. Pens neatly aligned in a cup, papers stacked in perfect right angles, a leather-bound journal open to a blank page, as if he'd just stepped out for a moment. Cleaning it felt like a final, brutal betrayal. I started with his bookshelf, dusting the spines of novels he'd read a dozen times. Tucked behind a row of worn engineering textbooks, I found something that didn't belong. It was a small metal lockbox, no bigger than a shoebox. I didn't recognize it. David wasn't a man for secrets or hidden things. I found the key on his old keychain, a tiny, simple thing I'd never paid attention to before. With a click, the lock opened. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed foam, was a single cassette tape. It was an old, clear, plastic cassette with a handwritten label in David's precise architectural script. It just said, the 12th of June, 10 years ago. I was puzzled. We hadn't owned a cassette player in at least 15 years. Why would he keep this? What was on it that was so important it needed to be locked away? I felt a tremor of unease, a sense that I was about to cross a threshold I couldn't uncross. Finding a cassette player felt like an archaeological dig. I rummaged through dusty boxes in the attic, surrounded by the ghosts of Halloweens and Christmases past. Each box I opened was a painful reminder of the life I had built, a life centered entirely on my family. I found Sophie's old ballet shoes and a box of Leo's academic awards. From the time they were small, the dynamic was set. Leo was the sun around which our family revolved. He was the golden child, destined for success. His grades were paramount. His sports teams were the family's priority. His moods dictated the emotional temperature of our home. My in-laws doted on him, convinced he was a prodigy, and openly criticized me for not doing more to foster his genius. I, of course, was the moon, reflecting his light and pulling the tides of the household. My own dreams had been packed away long before these boxes were sealed. I'd had a scholarship for architecture, but I gave it up when I became pregnant with Leo. David was just starting his engineering firm, working punishing hours. Someone had to be home. It was a sacrifice I made willingly, believing it was for the good of my family. I became the chauffeur, the tutor, the chef, the laundress, the emotional shock absorber. My work was endless but invisible. It was simply my duty. Sophie learned her role early. She wasn't the sun, so she became a satellite, orbiting her brother, echoing his desires and amplifying his complaints to get her share of the warmth. If Leo wanted a new computer, Sophie would explain how it would help him succeed, knowing she'd get a new tablet in the process. They were a team, and I was their shared resource to be managed and exploited. Finally, in a trunk under a pile of old blankets, I found it. Leo's old Walkman from the 92nd. It was bulky and scuffed, a relic of a bygone era. I brought it down to the kitchen, wiped off the dust, and put in a pair of fresh batteries. My hands trembled as I took the cassette from the lockbox. The tape was cold in my palm. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd helped with homework, and listened to endless complaints about teachers and friends. The silence of the house felt deafening. I slipped the cassette into the player. The plastic door clicked shut with a sound I hadn't heard in years. I took a deep breath, my finger hovering over the play button, a profound sense of dread washing over me. I felt like I was about to invite a stranger into my home, a ghost who knew all my secrets. I pressed the play button. The old mechanism whirred to life with a soft click, followed by the familiar, fuzzy hiss of magnetic tape. For a moment, that was all there was. Then, a voice emerged from the static, and the air left my lungs. It was David. Hearing him was like a physical blow, a mix of agony and impossible comfort. His voice was just as I remembered it, calm and deep, but there was an exhaustion in it that I hadn't recognized at the time. "Okay, the recorder is on," he said quietly, as if speaking to himself. "It's June 12th. Leo is home from his sophomore year. Sophie just graduated high school. I need to do this. I need a record of it, because I don't think anyone would believe me otherwise." A door opened on the recording, and the sound of younger voices filled the tiny headphones. "Dad, can this be quick?" It was Leo, his voice already dripping with the arrogance he wore like a cologne. "Sophie and I are meeting friends." David's recorded voice was patient. "I just wanted to talk about this summer. Your mother could use some help around the property. The fence needs painting. The garden is overgrown." Sophie let out an exaggerated sigh. "Dad, seriously? We're not groundskeepers. We have internships and summer assignments. Mom doesn't do anything else. She has all the time in the world." My breath caught in my throat. Then came Leo's voice, cold and dismissive. "Frankly, Dad, you should just hire someone. Why are we living like this? You make more than enough money." "It's embarrassing." Sophie's friends from prep school came over and saw Mom weeding the garden in that old hat. "It's rustic." In a bad way. I felt a hot flush of shame, not for myself, but for them. I remembered that day. I had been proud of my garden, but the worst was yet to come. "She just doesn't get it," Leo continued, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "Look, when you're gone, we'll handle things properly. We'll sell this place, get Mom a nice little condo somewhere, and invest the rest. It's the smart play. There's no point in all this capital just sitting here." Sophie chimed in immediately. "Exactly. It's our money too. Or it will be." I ripped the headphones from my ears, my stomach churning. They had been planning this for a decade. My entire life with them, my sacrifices, my love, it had all been a long, slow waiting game for them. I wasn't their mother. I was an obstacle. For a long time, I just sat there, the silence of the kitchen pressing in on me. The cheerful yellow walls suddenly felt like a movie set. a facade of a happy family life that had never really existed. The nausea from their betrayal began to subside, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years, a cold, hard clarity. Every time I had felt dismissed, every instance where I felt my contributions were invisible, every nagging feeling that I was somehow less than in my own home, it wasn't my imagination. It wasn't a personal failing, it was their strategy. The recording wasn't an isolated incident of youthful arrogance. It was a mission statement. My hand, now steady, reached for the headphones again. I had to hear the rest. I fast-forwarded through stretches of silence, stopping when I heard voices. There were other snippets, just as damning. A conversation about my tacky friends. An argument where Leo accused David of wasting money on my pointless hobbies after David bought me a new pottery wheel for my birthday. Each clip was another nail in the coffin of the family I thought I had. Then, I reached the end of the tape. After a long silence, I heard David's voice again, but this time it was different. It was raw, quiet, and full of a pain that mirrored my own. "Clara," he began, and my heart stopped. He was speaking to me. "My Clara, if you are hearing this, then I am gone, and you have found my greatest shame. I hear them. I see how they look at you, how they talk about you when they think I'm not listening. I see the entitlement I helped create, the greed my parents encouraged. I thought providing for them was the same as raising them right. I was wrong. I was a coward. I buried myself in work and let them chip away at your spirit piece by piece. I am so sorry. This tape, this is my proof and my apology. I have made arrangements. I have a plan to protect you. Don't let them win. Don't let them take this house, this life we built. Fight for it. Fight for yourself. Use this. Please, forgive me." Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of validation. He had seen, he had known, and he had armed me. In that moment, the grieving widow died, and someone else was born. I rewound the tape, placed it carefully back in its case, and hid the lockbox in my bedroom safe. I walked over to the phone and looked at the missed calls from Leo. I took a deep, steadying breath and dialed his number. When he answered, my voice was calm and even. "Leo, dear," I said, "you and Sophie are right. We need to have a family meeting to discuss the estate. Why don't you both come for dinner on Sunday?" Leo's voice on the phone was thick with smug satisfaction. "Of course, Mother. Sunday is perfect. We can have a productive conversation." Productive was their code word for my capitulation. In the days that followed, both he and Sophie were insufferably patronizing. Sophie sent me links to downsizing specialists and retirement communities in bland, beige suburbs. Leo emailed me the contact information for a high-pressure real estate agent he knew. They were like vultures circling, so confident in my weakness that they didn't even try to hide their impatience. They thought my invitation was a white flag. It was a declaration of war. While they were busy counting their chickens, I was meticulously loading my weapons. On Thursday, I took the cassette tape and drove to the downtown offices of Miller and Harrison, the law firm that had handled David's affairs for decades. Mr. Harrison, a kind, white-haired man who had been David's friend since college, greeted me with a sad smile. "Clara, it's good to see you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. I didn't waste time with pleasantries." I told him about the children's demands and the pressure they were applying. Then, I placed the small cassette player on his polished oak desk. Before we discussed the will, I said, "You need to listen to this. It's from David." I watched his face as the voices of my children, 10 years younger but just as venomous, filled the quiet office. His expression shifted from professional sympathy to quiet rage. When David's final, heartbreaking message to me played, Mr. Harrison took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He was silent for a full minute after the tape ended. "That son of a gun," he whispered. "He told me he had his reasons, but I never imagined this." He then opened a thick binder on his desk. "Clara, David was a brilliant engineer, but he was an even more brilliant strategist. The will Leo and Sophie have a copy of is accurate, but incomplete. It states that the estate is to be divided 3 ways. What they don't know is that their inheritance is held in a trust, governed by a very specific character clause. It stipulates that any beneficiary who acts with malicious greed or attempts to coerce you into selling your primary residence forfeits their entire share. This tape, he said, tapping the player, is Exhibit A. Their recent behavior is Exhibit B. They have already disinherited themselves. Then, he delivered the final blow. But that's not the most important part, Clara. David's engineering firm, the one the children know, was just a subsidiary. Years ago, he patented a groundbreaking water purification technology. He built an entirely separate parent company, Clarity Systems, to manage the patents. He owned it outright. It's a global enterprise, Clara. It's worth hundreds of millions. He slid a single share certificate across the desk. It was made out in my name. He left it all to you, unconditionally. You aren't just a beneficiary, Clara. You are the sole owner of the entire corporation. I left his office not as a grieving widow, but as a queen with an army at her back. Sunday dinner was going to be an execution. Sunday arrived, a bright, beautiful day that was completely at odds with the storm about to break within my house. I spent the afternoon cooking David's favorite meal: roast chicken, rosemary potatoes, and asparagus. Every chop of the knife, every stir of the gravy was deliberate. It was an act of remembrance for him, and a final, silent farewell to the children I once loved. The scent of rosemary filled the air, a comforting aroma that masked the metallic tang of vengeance in my heart. I set the mahogany table with our best china, the plates we only used for holidays. In the center, I placed the crystal vase filled with white roses. On the sideboard, next to the serving dishes, sat the small cassette player. It looked so innocuous. Leo and Sophie arrived precisely at 6, not with a bottle of wine or flowers, but with a leather portfolio tucked under Leo's arm. They breezed in, giving me performative air kisses that didn't land anywhere near my cheeks. "Smells good, Mom," Sophie said, already scanning the room as if measuring it for a real estate listing. Leo didn't even bother with pleasantries. He opened his portfolio on the hall table. "I've brought the listing agreement for you to look over," he said, "and a schedule of open houses. We need to move on this quickly." I just smiled serenely. "All in good time. Let's eat first." Dinner was a tense affair. They ate quickly, shoveling down the food with little comment, eager to get to the business at hand. They made small talk about their jobs and their upcoming vacations, conversations I was clearly not meant to be a part of. Finally, as I cleared the plates, Leo pushed his chair back and fixed me with a hard stare. He placed his hands flat on the table, a parody of a corporate executive closing a deal. It was then that he slammed his fist down, rattling the crystal vase. "We are not asking, Mother. We are telling you. You will sell this house. The market is peaking, and we need our inheritance now." Sophie nodded, her arms crossed. "He's right, Mom. It's selfish." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, savoring the peak of their arrogance. I walked to the sideboard, picked up the cassette player, and placed it on the table between them. "Before we discuss the future of my house," I said, my voice as cold and smooth as glass, "your father has something he'd like to say to you." I pressed play. The hiss of the tape filled the room, followed by the sound of their own youthful, venomous voices, plotting my future obsolescence. I watched the color drain from their faces. Leo's jaw went slack. Sophie looked like she was going to be sick. The recording ended with David's heartbroken voice, a final testament to their betrayal. "What? What is that?" Leo stammered, trying to regain his composure. "Some kind of deep fake? A joke?" I turned the machine off. "It's Exhibit A," I said calmly, "in the character clause of the trust your father established. A clause which states that any beneficiary who acts with malicious greed or attempts to coerce me forfeits their entire share. You disinherited yourselves 10 years ago. You just made it official tonight." Leo stared at me, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "You're lying," he hissed, his voice shaking. "Dad would never do that. "You've twisted this, you old witch. You probably forged it." Sophie started sobbing, not out of remorse, but out of pure panicked loss. "Our inheritance. It's ours. We were promised." They began to shout over each other, a desperate, ugly duet of greed and entitlement. They accused me of poisoning David against them, of manipulating an old man, of stealing what was rightfully theirs. I let them exhaust themselves, their rage filling the dining room until it was nothing more than ragged breathing and Sophie's pathetic whimpers. When they were finally quiet, I spoke again, my voice cutting through the suffocating air. "You are correct about one thing," I said, looking directly at Leo. "Your father's will doesn't matter. Not really. Because the inheritance you've been fighting over, the value of this house and his savings, it's pocket change." Leo scoffed. "What are you talking about? We know what Dad's company was worth." I allowed myself a small, cold smile. "No, you don't. You knew about David's little engineering firm. You had no idea about his real work. You had no idea about Clarity Systems." A flicker of confusion crossed their faces. They had never heard the name. "Years ago," I continued, "your father patented a water purification technology that is now used in over 50 countries. Clarity Systems is the parent company that holds those patents. It is a global corporation with assets valued in the hundreds of millions." I let that sink in. I watched the dawning, desperate hope in their eyes, the last flicker of greed before I extinguished it forever. Your father, knowing your true natures, structured his estate with perfect, well, clarity. He left his entire stake, 100% of the company, directly to me. There is no trust. There is no clause. It is mine. In fact, Leo, that venture capital firm you've been begging for seed money from for your sad little startup, I own it. Your application is denied. And Sophie, that lucrative marketing contract your agency has been chasing for months? That was with Clarity Systems. I read the proposal myself. It was unimpressive. The final vestiges of their arrogance crumbled, replaced by a hollow, vacant shock. They were nothing. They had lost a game they never even knew they were playing. I stood up from the head of the table, no longer their victim, no longer their mother, but the woman who held their entire world in the palm of her hand and had just closed her fist. "The meal is over," I said, my voice resonating with a power they had never heard. "Get out of my house. You will forward any future inquiries to Mr. Harrison. You will not call me, and you will not come here again. We are finished." They stumbled out of the dining room and out the front door without another word, 2 ghosts being exorcised from my life. The click of the lock behind them was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The house was silent again, but this time, it was a clean, peaceful silence. It was the sound of freedom. I looked at the portrait of David over the fireplace, a young man full of dreams. "Thank you, my love," I whispered. "I fought for it.